We're all set.
Cool, okay. Well, shall we just roll into it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, thanks, James, for offering to have a chat. So here at Orion Health, we're currently sort of formalising our test process, and we've got all the pieces of it. And one of those pieces is, how do we test a new feature? So we have new testers come into the company all the time, and they need a resource to go to just get a bit of a guideline about how they actually approach the work. Here at Orion, we use agile development processes. So we have a day of sprint planning, and then we actually have the sprint itself, followed by a demo at the end. And what I thought would be really interesting is to hear from your point of view what the tester's role is right up front in sprint planning, interacting with the developers, all of that stuff, to actually see how the feature under development is going to be tested, and then moving on to the actual sprint itself, where the real work's happening. So yeah, starting with the sprint planning, how do you see testers interacting, actually making sure this thing under development's testable?
Well, first let's begin with the very most basic truth about testing. A tester is like a lighthouse, or perhaps like the headlights on a car. The tester does not steer the project, the tester illuminates the status of the product. And so the role of the tester is to inform his or her client to the best of his or her ability about what's going on with the product. So that means that the activity that you are doing during the sprint planning is to prepare to do that. And there's two major things that you've got to do in that sprint planning meeting. The first thing is that in order to do your job, you have to learn. Testing is learning. Testing is all about learning. Testing is made of learning. It's just like being a snowman, where snow is learning. That's what testing's all about. So you can't go wrong as a tester if you learn everything you can know about that product and about the environment it's running in and about all the users. So in the sprint planning meeting, you're thinking, okay, what can I know about this? And maybe before the sprint planning meeting starts, you can do a lot to know about the technology, about the users, about all the other things. So you're constantly learning. The second thing that you need to do in the sprint planning meeting is to focus on testability. Yeah. The big thing is make sure that the developers are developing this thing with testing in mind. And there's two big elements to testability that should just be at the tip of your tongue at all times. One of them is observability. Can you see this thing? Can you see all of its states? And the typical straightforward idea of observability is log files. Are there files, are there menus, are there displays, but mainly log files that are telling you what the state the product is in, what states it has been in. Log files are very important to testing because with the right kind of log files, you automatically find out what you've been testing. You don't have to remember what you were testing. You find out what you're testing because the log files tell you what you tested. So that's one thing. The other thing is controllability. That's the other big pillar of testability. Controllability. That means, can you put the product into the states that you need it to be in? Can you configure it? Can you influence it? So what we want is a scriptable interface if possible. If somebody creates a system and the system can only be controlled through biofeedback and good vibrations, it's going to be tougher to test that thing than if it's a command line interface. All right, if I could just say here's my command, do that, then that's a much more testable system because we can just batch our commands. So basically, I want to make sure the system is observable and is controllable. A couple of other things about testability is simplicity, and during a sprint planning meeting, you can be advocating for simplicity. The more complicated they make a feature, more complicated they make its implementation, the more stuff there can go wrong.
Right. But how is that? I mean, you said that testers don't, that they don't control the sprint planning meeting or the direction things are going. But
right.
if things are seemingly becoming more and more complicated, what as testers should we sort of be raising our hands, standing up, saying, hey, this is heading in the wrong direction, or how bold do you think we should be?
Well, you can be very bold in saying what impact it's going to have on you doing your job. Hey, look, I can test something even that is very hard to test. I'm just going to be slower at it. If that's okay with you, project manager and developer, then go on, do it. You can do whatever you want. I'm just going to tell you what kind of impact that's going to have on me. But you see, usually there are a variety of different ways that something can be implemented, and the developers don't think about testability, so they just pick. They might though, well, it doesn't matter, it's 50-50, I just feel like doing it this way today. And that might be 10 times harder to test than the other way that they chose, but they weren't thinking about testability. So I'm not talking about bossing people around on testability. What I'm talking about is you are there in the sprint planning meeting partly to explain how you might test something, partly to be alert and to call out areas where it's going to be especially difficult to test unless the developer gives you a special tool or gives you a special interface or is otherwise careful to design testability in. And partly you're there to learn, and that means that if you're gonna, if you need to know how something might be implemented under the hood in order to test it better, then you should be asking those basic questions. And you should get good, tester, at hearing a developer go through a chalk talk where they put little squares and arrows up on a whiteboard and they walk you through how the product's going to be implemented. You should get really good at, first of all, making developers want to give you that whiteboard talk. That's one thing. Make them want to do it. And secondly, you've got to be good at learning from those.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's completely right. And we need to, the team needs to understand that this stuff up front actually results in a product that can be tested well, which is going to have high quality at the end. It's not going to take a huge amount of effort and be confusing.
Yeah, that's the idea. Now, there's one other thing that I can think of. There might be others, but I want to add this in as far as what you do in a sprint planning meeting. You need to be alert to how something might be easy to develop relative to its testability. So even if something is, not terribly untestable, maybe it can be implemented in 30 minutes and it's still going to take you 3 days to test it. Maybe because you have to develop a special tool or you have to develop special data and it's going to take you a bunch of time to develop that data, that special sample data you need to test with. But you need to alert people about that because there is an assumption otherwise that something will not take any longer to test than it took to develop. And testers need to keep their clients from falling into this assumption that you should have been knowing that already. Why, it only took me a few minutes to integrate Internet Explorer with our product. How come it's taking you so long to test Internet Explorer integrated in with our product? But that's a lot of stuff. Anytime you hear someone say, "Oh, with Python I can write a web browser in 10 minutes," well, I guarantee you it doesn't take 10 minutes to test that web browser if it's really a web browser. It's going to take a whole lot longer than that. unless you just trust Python, which is a whole different matter.
No, we know that well here at Orion Health with our enterprise type products. One little change, one seemingly little change can mean days of testing, that's for sure. Cool, okay, well, is there anything else in the sprint planning phase you'd like to add?
I could also say that if you are in a sprint planning meeting and you got a document, perhaps a spec or something that you got to take a look at before the meeting, I urge you to go through that document with a blue or a red pen, some kind of colorful pen, and you want to circle anything that looks ambiguous or dodgy in any way, put little question marks next to it if you need to remember to ask a question about it. You need to be thinking ahead of the meeting how you're going to test something, and you need to be ready to alert development about the questions that come out of the document that you might have. And that's a skill in and of itself, the skill of going through, walking step by step, line by line through a specification, no matter how badly it's written or how well it's written, and annotating it in preparation for a meeting. That's something that you need to practice and get good at. So there's that too.
Cool. No, that's really good.
You may need to put up a special card. You may need to put up a story card if you end up having an aspect of your testing, like getting your test lab ready, that doesn't have a corresponding development part to it.
Yeah.
Then that means that you're going to have to add depending on if you're doing a Scrum thing, then it becomes a story all by itself that the testers have to work on.
Yeah. There's all that setup work that's outside of testing itself, which is time committed to the sprint. Yeah. That's right. Cool. Okay. Well, moving out of the sprint planning, so we move into the sprint itself, and so the developers get cracking pretty quickly. The testers might spend a day or two getting set up with getting the data ready, getting the environments ready, but normally morning 2 of the sprint, there's been some code that's been committed the previous day. Would you mind going through the process of actually testing in the sprint? Should there have been any interaction on the first day before code was committed, or should the testers be waiting until they've already written all their test cases during the first week and the products features done at the end to test it?
I'm not a big fan of writing test cases at all. In fact, I just don't generally write them unless there's a very compelling need to construct formal test cases. And this is just because writing test cases turns out to have very little to do with testing. Testing is where you operate the product and you observe the product and you find problems in the product. So what I'll do is I'll create testing notes of all kinds. I'll make outlines of risks and potential problems. I'll make outlines of the different aspects of the product, and I use those outlines as guidelines. If I'm doing my testing has to be formal, for instance, if there's a regulatory aspect to the testing, then my informal testing will build toward formal testing. But the way to think about formal testing is that formal testing is like opening night on Broadway. And informal testing are the many, many, many rehearsals that you had before opening night on Broadway. Now the theater critics are coming on opening night. They don't get to see the rehearsals. The auditors come on opening night. They don't care how many rehearsals you did. So what the bottom line means that I do my testing informally first, and as I test and gain experience testing something, right as soon as I can see something, talk to somebody about it, I'm already thinking like a tester, developing test ideas, and of course I may write some of my ideas down. But I don't worry about formalizing test cases as such, even in a regulated environment, until I'm well along the path of having experienced testing, because then I'll have some really good ideas about formal testing. And one of the classic downfalls of regulated testing is people who are told by their management, or they think they're supposed to, immediately blurt out their final formal test cases the moment they first see a specification, and almost guaranteed those test cases are trivial. Many of them will have to be thrown away because the product won't really work the way that they expected it would work, and there's a tremendous amount of waste there. So I begin informally first, which actually fits the whole agile idea. Is you begin informally first and you build toward the formal, just like you build toward the formal product, the actual shipping product. You don't start with, I'm going to write my first line of code on this product and it shall be shipping line of code. You don't know if that's going to be a shipping line of code or not. But you are reaching toward that, certainly, with your with the work that you're doing. So one of the things that I find that is tremendously powerful is to do my first test execution whenever any code is available with the developer, right? With them on their machine, actually. I don't even wait for a formal build. I want to do it right on their machine if possible. This has many benefits. For one thing, it energizes me, and it tends to energize the developer too. Secondly, the developer gets to see how I'm thinking about things, and I get to see how he's thinking about things. Thirdly, and this is the most important thing for me, I don't have to reproduce any bugs, and I don't have to report any bugs, because the developer just sees it and he goes, oh, hang on a moment, code, try it now. Ah, that's much better. And that saves me maybe 30 minutes per bug in saved time. It's amazing how much faster it is to test right alongside the developer. Now, I don't want to do all my testing like that because the developer's got other things to do, and because I need quiet time in order to come up with some of my ideas. So what I do is, actually, we used to have a name for this process that I just described at Borland International. We called it shake and bake. Shake and bake was the process that preceded the independent testing by the tester. It was done with the developer, and the idea is, let's get those easy bugs out of the way right away, and then we'll be able to test something really quickly, like on the same day that the developer wanted to release it to me. He's releasing something better to me because I did some shake and bake with him, and I've learned more about how the product is supposed to be run because the developer said, no, you don't understand, it's supposed to be this way, not that way. And I get all that kind of rapid learning. I'm also building respect with that developer, and then I'm ready to start doing my testing on my own. Now, this is not always possible because a lot of times the developer is doing like new stuff every day, and meanwhile I'm still testing the stuff that's a little bit older. But what I want to do, especially for the major new bits of technology that are being put in place, is on a regular basis, at least once a week, I want to be testing alongside the developer if possible. It will maximize my learning, and it will maximize the speed at which we get this thing to come together.
Right. And what sort of time frames typically do like a shake and bake session with the developer? 30 minutes, half an hour, a couple of hours?
I generally set a target of 90 minutes, and the reason why I set 90 minutes is partly because I read somewhere that 90 minutes is some kind of cognitively optimal study time if you're studying, and in my experience that's about right. You know, if you push a block of work past about 90 minutes, you start kind of getting tired and you need to get up and stretch and that kind of thing. But of course, there are natural limitations and natural dynamics. So sometimes you just only need to look at something for 20 minutes together, and then you get a good feel for it. And other times, I had one test session that lasted 8 hours, from 4 p.m. to 2 a.m. No, it wasn't. It was 4 p.m. to midnight is what it was. And then I worked an extra 2 hours to get the report done. But the actual testing was 8 hours of testing. It was supposed to start early in the day. It was the very first time I got to see a medical device that I was supposed to test, and we were just so eager after months of hearing about this thing. We were so eager to jump on it that the time just flew. It was a lot of fun. We found lots of bugs, and you know, we might have taken a few minutes of a break a couple of times, but basically it was just one long session, and that felt right somehow to do that. Although I wouldn't have in advance said, let's spend 8 hours on this. It just kind of turned into that. So sometimes you get into the flow, but when I'm planning in advance, I'm planning for a 90-minute a session as a general rule.
Cool. Okay. So code's been that's around testing functionality within Sprint, and what about testing bugs that the developers fix? So there's also that side of it in Sprint. It's not all just new feature, but there's often a lot of bugs going, new code going in. Do you treat that just like a feature as well? Sit with the developer, have a look at the bug fix.
I might do that with the developer, especially if it's like of a complex or challenging kind of bug fix or something that's really difficult to test. I might work with the developer on that. I'm a little nervous about that just for one reason, and that's because sometimes when you're too close to the developer and you're talking about fixes, then it can get pretty easy to hear the developer say, oh, it was a really simple fix and it's only going to affect this and not that, and so you kind of get sucked into that and you end up not doing the real independent look at it from all angles that you might otherwise do. Now, I'm not saying that that's a very serious problem, but it makes me a little nervous to do the majority of my bug fix testing while the developer's staring at me, you know. But it depends on the bug fix. It depends on the kind of you know, technological situation that you're dealing with. I would say that when a bug is fixed, you want to retest that as soon as possible. The developer's brain is now thinking about that fix and it hasn't moved on to something else. If you could, ideally, you would test that thing the moment that fix was available and be able to tell the developer, it looks pretty good, you can move on now, instead of coming back, you know, even the next day or 2 days later and go, well, it's not really fixed, because then they have to reload that knowledge again and think, where was I? What was I doing? There's a flow to development, and what you want to do as a tester is, to the best of your ability, testers, keep the developers in the flow of their work. The more you can keep that dinner plate going and they feel like they're chugging along at a nice constant rate, not stopping and starting because you pull them this way and that way, the less bugs I think that they're going to commit. Because part of the reason bugs happen is because developers have a scattered brain, because they get distracted because they are trying to fix something too quick, or they get out of their flow state. And so as a tester, I don't see myself as just finding bugs. I see myself as doing anything that I feel I need to do to keep the developers in flow. I feel a little bit like like I'm part of the pit crew for the developers, and developers are in a 24-hour race and they have to race the car, and I'm fixing the car and I'm refueling the car, and I'm just trying to get them to do the best work that they can do. Now, technically that's not my job as a tester. Technically that's their manager's job, right? But it actually makes my work easier if the developer creates some fewer bugs, and if the developer thinks that I'm there to support him and help him, he's going to help me. He's going to tell me things he might not otherwise have told me. So getting a really good relationship with the developer is important. And even if the developer is a very egotistical type of person, and I have to tell you, I like egotistical developers. I love it when I'm dealing with those, I have to tell you. Now, maybe it's a little nicer when they're not super egotistical, but I have to say that the thing about a developer who's a real prima donna, one thing you can say about that person and that is he has or wants to have pride in himself. He wants to show you that he's good. He wants to show you that he's smart. He wants to show you he's smarter than you. And I feel toward those developers exactly the same way I feel toward my son, which is go ahead, feel that you're smarter than me. Whatever you need to do, it means you care. And when I show that kind of person respect, what I find in return is I get tremendous respect. That is the one weakness, that you can exploit. Bear this in mind, testers. The weakness of the prima donna developer is they need respect the way zombies need brains. And you give those, see, not many people know this, but when you actually feed a zombie brains, it becomes your friend for life, and it will not attack you anymore. And I wish more people knew that about zombies. We'd have a lot less zombie-related apocalypses if people knew that. And that's some of what I feel about developers too. I stroke their egos because when I do, they go, oh, obviously you're a smart tester, not like those other testers. And because you're smart, I'm going to listen to you. And I like being listened to because it turns out I'm an egotistical tester. So that's part of how I understand these guys, is I'm a little like them myself. And the thing that I worry about is not the egotistical developer, it's the apathetic developer. It's a developer that just doesn't care. He doesn't care whether his work is good or bad. He's just there for the paycheck. Those are the people that really, for me, are very tough to work with, not the other kind. So I just wanted to say that.
That's good. And stroke their ego. I like that.
It pays dividends.
Sorry.
It pays dividends, that's all I'm saying. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. Just going back to when a bug fix is committed and testing it at the earliest stage. So
yes.
We here at Orion Health are in a web-based world. Just to put it out there for the testers listening to this, what we've found really helpful is when we know a bug fix has been or is about to be committed, the dev can actually just send us the link to their dev environment on their machine, so we don't even have to sit with them. From our own machine, we can access their environment where the bug fix lives. It's not in the nightly yet, and we can actually run through test scenarios before the code's and built in the nightly.
That is cool. That is cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. I was in a hardware world previously, but there's a lot of advantages to web-based applications in testing.
Yeah, sure. Cool.
Cool. Well, thanks, James. Is there any parting words?
Yes. I have parting words. By the way, I'm speaking to you, but from Helsinki, Finland. I don't know if it's evident from the background that I have here. It's night here. But here's my parting words from Helsinki. Automation. I'm a programmer, and I write tools that help me test, but it's always dangerous to get sucked into automation where you spend a lot more time on your tools and your cucumbers and fits and all that stuff than it's worth. So be careful of that tendency if you have a programmer type of approach to testing. In the agile world, there's often a lot of pressure to automate, but I urge you to look hard at that, because I've done a lot of automation in my time and I've seen a lot of amazing waste. Stuff that ends up just getting thrown away, stuff that, I've seen someone demo me an amazing automation system, and basically what it amounted to is, congratulations, at great expense, you've managed to simulate one dim-witted tester. You have simulated that, and yes, that dim-witted tester will stay up all night and you don't have to pay him, except you do because of all the maintenance cost of keeping this dim-witted simulated tester doing his dim-witted simulated testing. So I'm talking to you as a programmer, and I use test automation, and I don't call it test automation really, it's what everyone else calls it. I call it tool-supported software testing, because software testing can only be done by humans. Just like programming is only done by humans, and if a non-human does it, we call it compiling. So I'm not saying don't use tools. By all means, use tools. You just have to constantly ask yourself, am I just having fun with a tool because I like playing with tools, or am I actually doing the testing work that needs to be done right now? Keep asking yourself that. That's my parting words about automation.
Awesome, James. That's great, because test automation is a big thing on our horizon coming up. There's a lot of talk. We're putting in a lot of thought around how to best implement it and what we should do.
I urge you to think in terms of tool-supported testing, and there's so many ways that tools can help test. For instance, you can have a tool that creates test data, and that's a kind of test automation, you might say, tool-supported software testing. But so for some reason, everyone thinks, I want to simulate a human at a keyboard. That's what I want to do. And they pour resources into doing that. Of course, it's easier to do that over the web if you have web-based stuff, because you can bypass the UI and go right to the server. And I've done stuff like that, and I recommend stuff like that. But it's a glorious trap. It's like a Venus flytrap. It lures you in with this sugary scent, and then you're torn apart. So just approach it with caution, and keep asking yourself, does this really matter? But there are many wonderful ways to use tools. So I'll let you go, and I'll send you this. I'm going to send you this file, and you can edit it, any way you want. And
thank you.
And there you go. All right.